Joining me now is the Greens immigration spokesperson, Sarah Hanson-Young. Sarah, I want to ask you first about this no advantage test, one of the recommendations. Does this, in your view, really mean that asylum seekers sent to Nauru or Papua New Guinea could be there for how many years? 1, 5, more?
Basically indefinitely, because there's no time limit. And in fact, the no disadvantage test is about trying to say it's an equal time across the region. And in Malaysia, it could be anywhere like 70 years if you were to wait on that list in queue. In Indonesia, it's over 5. In other parts, in Thailand, it's more like 40. So it is a ridiculous amount of time to try and say we will dump people, lock them up on an island prison, and they have to wait there for the same length of time other people would.
Is this in fact worse than the Malaysia solution then?
Well, look, it is really damaging to people's mental health. One of the things that we saw last time round was that it was that length of time, that long-term detention, without any sense of ending, without any sense of what the resolution is, and a time limit that really drove people crazy, that made people mad, mental health issues, suicide attempts, self-harm, children attempting suicide. That's what we saw back then. It was bad.
In these recommendations, though, that would have provisions to prevent that kind of mental health episode from happening again.
The problem is, and I think the panel, due credit to them, they said that we would need to tackle those things, but the legislation doesn't provide it. There's no safeguards in the legislation. The whole point of this is to take out all the rights and protections that refugees have, so that the government can be as mean and as cruel as possible. So there's no safeguards in law. There's no way of challenging it. One of the things we're going to do today, when the legislation comes before the House of Representatives, is move an amendment to try and put a time limit. People should be in this place no longer than a year. A year is even going on the edge of saying that's a very long time, particularly for children.
Paris Aristotle, part of this expert panel, is a refugee advocate, a refugee himself. You've been quite critical of him and the recommendations he's made in this report, but you'd have to admit he has first-hand experience. So is that justified, your criticism of him?
My comment in relation to Paris, and I spoke to him quite a bit yesterday about this, was that he understands first-hand how hard it is to advocate for people on Nauru when there's no legal backing. And that's what this legislation is about. There's no rights in the legislation for children, for adults, for mums and dads, for vulnerable people. It's all a bit of a, let's trust us, we'll look after people, let us dump them on Nauru and then we'll treat them properly.
Are you saying this panel has taken into account too much of the political aspects of this? But surely you'd have to admit that the deadlock that we were in Parliament, that they did need to look at the political aspects in order to get some kind of outcome.
What they've done is stuck by this myth that deterrents work, and that indefinite detention is a deterrent enough in itself. We've got indefinite detention here on the Australian mainland. We don't have time limits. It hasn't stopped people coming.
600 seekers, though, have died at sea over the last 2 years. Surely, yes, this is a tough approach, but isn't it humane as well?
No, it is not humane. What is humane is about giving people a safer option in the first place. The people who are going to be dumped on Nauru in the Pacific Solution Mark II, John Howard meets Julia Gillard, is going to be people who have already boarded dangerous boats. Nauru was open under John Howard before the Civ-X sank and 353 women and children lost their lives at sea. It didn't save those people's lives. In fact, it forced people onto boats to meet their fathers and meet their brothers and meet their husbands. And that's exactly the type of rhetoric, exactly this type of dangerous policies we're seeing again today.
But don't parliamentarians have a responsibility to deal with the situation we have, not as the Greens wish it to be?
What the Greens have said, and it's been backed by experts who have all submitted to this panel, that the best way of saving lives is to take away the desperation for people to force those boats. And that's what we should be focusing on, rather than changing our laws so that we can be as cruel as possible. One of the worst things about this legislation is that there is no protection for children. Children are about to be dumped on Nauru, even orphaned kids, with no responsibility of the minister, no one looking after them, and no limit for how long they can get there.
Just finally, the Greens, it looks like, in Parliament at least, won't... the coalition's going to lend the numbers to the government, so you really won't have a say whether these amendments do get through. How now are you going to move forward in your agenda?
Well, I think the government and the opposition seriously need to consider this amendment, because this is about the basic right of people to know how long they're going to be locked up and imprisoned. And I think the Australian people will be very concerned to hear that Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott are suggesting they can imprison children on a remote island in Nauru with no time limit. It goes absolutely against the Australian rule of law and the Australian fair go. Children don't deserve that. You know, one of these things about the disadvantage test, I tell you what, there is no advantage to being part of the world's most disadvantaged children, and they are the kids we're talking about.
Sarah Hanson-Young, we'll have to leave it there. And on Lunchtime Agenda, we are going to take a break. This conversation about